Finally wrapping up my reviews of animated Teen Titans properties related to the old 2003 show. 100%. Let's talk about Teen Titans Trouble in Tokyo, the made-for-TV movie that acts as sort of the second finale of the series. This is clearly meant to be set in the same universe as the show, and even though it doesn't really follow up on anything from the show itself, save for one emotional plotline, it's clear also that it's supposed to take place after everything else. Because, it came out after everything else, and there's no reason to think that this is, stuck in the middle of the series, and one big reason that it's not. It's a pretty straightforward movie. The Teen Titans go to Tokyo to deal with a threat, and they encounter a mystery, and there's some character development along the way. Specifically, Jump City is attacked by this Super Sentai hero, and when they show up to fight him, he attacks the tower, trashing it. But they are able to capture him, and even though he only speaks Japanese, they're able to translate it. And he starts talking about someone named Brushogun, who he's clearly afraid of, saying that Brushogun will erase him. Then he manages to get himself free enough to trigger a sprinkler, and suddenly he's gone. So the Titans head off to Japan, to Tokyo specifically, to try to pursue this Brushogun, which, all things considered, is a pretty good setup for this. It reintroduces us to the Titans. There's a big fight scene at the beginning specifically that reintroduces us to the Titans and what they can do, keeping in mind what all of their specific abilities are and showing them off pretty spectacularly. And it sets up an interesting mystery, which, if you've seen the show, you know is Robin's thing. And this movie does heavily focus on Robin. And I will say right out the gate that even though, aside from Robin and Starfire, but to a lesser extent, the other characters don't get a ton to do in this movie, they still have a lot of personality. In fact, there's a comedy sequence showing them packing up for and then heading to Tokyo that's not only exactly the kind of thing you would see in the series, but I think it's one of the best funny comedy sequences of the entire show. And once they're in Tokyo, you have some clashes of personalities, with Beast Boy wanting to treat this like a vacation and visit interesting spots throughout the city, and the others do too, obviously, but Robin wants to treat this very seriously. They're here to do their jobs, and they want to make a good impression on the people of Japan. So of course, when a legally distinct giant reptile attacks, they try to fight it, but they don't really know their way around. They aren't familiar with the layout of a Japanese city, so they don't do a particularly good job. And then it turns out they didn't really need to do anything anyway, because a group of high-tech troopers, led by a Commander Daizo, show up with technology specifically for something like this, and bring the monster down. He's happy to see the Titans, giving them a tour of his facility, and it's like one of those high-tech super facilities in the movies about the thing that's a legally distinct version of. And he's entirely willing to help them with whatever they came to Tokyo for, but when they mention Brushogun, he insists that Brushogun is just a myth. He never existed, he's just a story that people would tell each other, making Robin feel foolish, and giving the others an excuse to use the rest of the time they had allotted to be in Tokyo, to be tourists in Tokyo. They all go off and do their own thing. Raven goes off looking for something to read. We later find out, though, that she was actually looking for a book about Brushogun, so she was actually still investigating, which I think is cool. I think it's entirely in character for her to look for something interesting to read that might also help with whatever thing they're doing at the time. Cyborg finds an all-you-can-eat sushi place and almost puts it out of business. Beast Boy becomes the protagonist of a harem anime, and Starfire drags Robin off on what is definitely supposed to be a date. They even have that obligatory, we're in Japan, so I have to go play DDR at an arcade scene, right? Like, even Yu-Gi-Oh! Did that. And there's a great scene between the two of them where I'm not sure where they were sitting. It was like under a billboard or something. And they clearly want to start making out. So they slide apart for a second and start prepping for the kissing, and then slide back together. And there's no way that they each didn't know what the other was doing. It felt, I don't know, charming It was a charming little scene with these characters of a type that we haven't really had before. But, just before they start the making out, Robin has an epiphany about the case. He realizes the Super Sentai guy, Psychotech, was genuinely afraid. He wouldn't be genuinely afraid of a myth. And he could have been lying to try to throw Robin off, but his fear seemed real. So Robin insists to Starfire that they don't have time for this. They are heroes first and foremost, and that they have to go back to work, which hurts her. He flat out says that they don't have time for this, that they have to be heroes all the time. And it's clear from their dialogue and the way that she reacts that she loves the fact that he's a hero. It's one of the reasons that she loves him, because she does love him. But that, they have to make time for other things. And this is an important other thing. Something that they both really want. Obviously. But she flies off, and then Robin goes off on his own. And meanwhile, you can see a shadowy figure in a dark room talking about the situation and observing them through monitors. And we're supposed to assume this is Brush Shogun. He sends out more minions to shadow them, to make sure that earlier when it seemed like they were giving up on looking for Brush Shogun, that was going to stick. And the way that he creates these minions is super interesting, because they're made out of what looks like paint or ink, which explains the abilities that Psychotech guy had. He had tech in his suit and stuff, but he could also regenerate limbs, which was obviously accomplished by pooling more ink from inside his body outside of his body to recreate his limbs when they were destroyed. And the giant lizard from before had a similar ability to regenerate, meaning that he was connected to this too. And what's cool about this mystery is that if you pay attention, you can start to piece together who the real villain is, because there's a twist villain in this. And while it's not super deep or anything, it's pretty interesting. It's more than they had to give us, and it works pretty well. But anyway, when Robin makes clear that he's going to continue to investigate, the person in the shadows decides to take the Titans out. So he sends Psychotech, a different Psychotech this time, but still Psychotech, after Robin. And Robin, expecting Psychotech to have regenerative abilities, beats him to death. And this time the ink that makes up Psychotech is splattering everywhere. So it looks like Robin is covered in blood. And then Daiso shows up to arrest him for murder. They don't say the word murder. But Robin gets arrested for murder in this movie. And it's pretty brutal. It's a surprisingly shocking scene. And the others, as they start to learn about what happened or else get close to uncovering stuff, or our Beast Boy, legit, Beast Boy was a little annoying in this movie. Not super annoying. He was still enjoyable for the most part, but I found him a little annoying in this movie. The things that were shadowing them attack them. Cyborg is attacked by a big, funny anime robot. Beast Boy is attacked by a cute cat girl. Raven is attacked by a Miyazaki creation. And Starfire is attacked by Astro Boy. And though they manage to win, these are some pretty tough fights. These things are pretty powerful. Comparable to our heroes. Robin does manage to escape custody, though, giving up his costume for a while, putting on some civvies that are, I think, pretty stinking rad, honestly, and delving a bit into the city's underworld to try to find out more about Brush Shogun. And it turns out the criminal element in the city doesn't think he's a myth. It's just that the troopers want everyone to think he is, which is another clue in all of this. There's a chase scene after this where he runs from some of the troopers, only for Starfire to save him, and they have another really cute, intimate moment, but it's broken up by the others arriving and giving Robin whatever information they've been able to accrue from their own experiences. Raven being the one to make the most progress here by revealing that she found a book about Brush Shogun, giving his backstory, that he was an artist who wanted to bring his creations to life, so he tapped into black magic to do it, but it turned him into a paper and ink monster who can create ink beings, which is a pretty stinking interesting villain, and one that's entirely appropriate for a place like Japan that's so known for anime and manga, as well as things like traditional ink drawing and stuff. The traditional and the modern. It just works really well. And Robin reasons out that if these things are made of ink, as the Titans have all worked out at this point, and they're being created by somebody and sent out into the city, the perfect place for that would be a closed-down manga production company in the city, one that Beast Boy wanted to visit earlier. So they go there, and sure enough, Brush Shogun is there, but he's fused into a printing machine, enslaved by Commander Daizo to create criminals for Daizo to catch, increasing his own prestige. In fact, the first psychotech that came for the Titans in the beginning and gave that clue about Brush Shogun was sent by Brush Shogun himself without Daizo's permission to get the attention of the Titans so that Brush Shogun could free himself. Like, yeah, he was still a supervillain, but he doesn't deserve to be enslaved, and so they're going to help him, if they can. This leads to a big fight between the Titans and the Troopers, who, it turns out at least some of the Troopers are also made out of ink, as well as some clones of the same Japanese media-inspired villains that they fought previously, though these don't seem to be quite as well put together. They're easier to defeat. There's just more. And when Daizo is cornered, he fuses himself with Brush Shogun and the printing machine and becomes a giant monster who's also pretty problematic for our heroes. But they're able to remove Brush Shogun from him, which causes Brush Shogun to lose the last of his power. I guess the machine was somehow sustaining him at this point because he's pretty worn down. And that causes the spell to break, and all of the ink turns back into ink. And because he was so desperate to get away from Robin, and he turned into a giant monster, Daizo's now revealed his true colors to the whole city. The Titans, who were fugitives prior to this, are lauded as heroes. Robin and Starfire, who had a big old passionate kiss at the end of the battle back there, are finally officially a couple, and Robin says they can stay in town for a little while and actually go on vacation, actually spend some time as actual kids. It's a cute ending that finally gets Robin and Starfire together after all of the will they won't they throughout the entire run of the show, and shows us a softer side of Robin, too. And Beast Boy still has his harem, so, you know, that's nice. Good for him. And the movie closes out with the Teen Titans voice actors singing one-to-one translations of the lyrics from the goofy Japanese version of their theme song, and it's absolutely adorable. And all things considered, this is a pretty good movie. Like, it's not amazing. It's like a 6.5 or 7 out of 10, I think, probably, like, just objectively. But subjectively, if you're a fan of this version of the characters, it's pretty spectacular. It's really fun seeing them again. The movie looks great, the animation is nice, it's colorful, it's bright, the action scenes are fantastic. All of the Titans are in character, their personalities on full display, and this really leans into the anime influence of the show. Obviously, they literally go to Japan in this movie. There's tons of little Easter eggs and references through the entire thing. I have pointed several of them out. Like, stylistically, I think the only weakness in this entire thing is that towards the end, as the Titans are finally putting everything together and getting ready for the climax, there's one of the funny, stylistic Teen Titans style chase scenes in here that I think was not only one of the worst of the entire series, but, like, just, it completely ruined the tone of that part of the movie. It shouldn't have been there. But, like, I kind of half wonder if they needed to fill a little bit of time. This movie's pretty short. It's an hour and 15 minutes long because it was made to fit in an hour and a half TV block. And I kind of wonder, did they kind of, at some point, overestimate how much they had for the movie, or underestimate how much they needed for the movie, and just kind of threw that together to fill a couple minutes of time? Regardless, I thought it was bad, and I kind of wish that just little bit of time had been given to, like, I don't know, anything else, like more cyborg gags or something, just to give one of the characters that wasn't Starfire and Robin something to do. Because, like, the main emotional through line of the movie is that, like, it becomes, I think, pretty obvious pretty early on that this is going to be the one where Robin and Starfire get together if they get together. And the plot of the movie centers around Robin solving this mystery, and there's a nice sense of dramatic irony here, because we know stuff that he doesn't. Like, there's the scene at the beginning when the Titans first arrive in Tokyo, where we cut away to the figure that we eventually learn is Daiso, and he says that a psychotech must have talked. That's the only reason the Titans could be here. And, like, he's talking to somebody, so it's clear that somebody else is there. And then there's a detail about the first psychotech, the one that attacked Jump City, that Robin never seems to realize, but becomes obvious to anyone who's been paying attention to the movie when it's revealed that these things are made out of ink. Back at the beginning, when Robin was questioning psychotech, he said that he was afraid that Brushogun would erase him for his failure, but it's pretty obvious that that's what he did to himself when he triggered the sprinkler system. The water from the sprinkler washed him away. So if you've been paying attention and you remembered that detail that even the Titans talked about at the time, how did he seemingly disappear? When we find out that he's made of ink, that's just one more clue as to the true nature of what's going on, that psychotech was sent by somebody other than the person who has done all the rest of this. That, at the very least, there was more than meets the eye to that first psychotech compared to all this other stuff. And it does fit together pretty well. The answer to this mystery does retroactively make everything fit together pretty well. Daiso did manage to capture Brushogun, but he wasn't able to capture any other villains, so he used Brushogun's powers against Brushogun's wishes to effectively replace the criminal element of Tokyo with his own criminals that he was in control of, so he could catch them and make himself seem more important than he actually is. He was just a greedy, egotistical, overconfident, and pretty strategically intelligent guy, willing to put people in danger and probably kill a lot of people to make his life better. Like, he himself isn't a huge physical threat. He didn't even try to fight Robin until he turned into a giant monster. But in terms of villain plans, this is one of the bigger and more intricate ones in the show. The only question that's kind of left up in the air is, how much did Daiso know about the psychotech attacking the Titans? Because he had no reason to do that. He had no reason to send that psychotech there. Like, it doesn't seem like he was sending that guy against the Titans already, and Brushogun just kind of like reprogrammed it to give the Titans the hint about him so that they would come to Tokyo. It really does seem like Brushogun made that psychotech entirely on his own without Daiso's knowledge, and yet in that cutaway towards the beginning that I mentioned a couple minutes ago, Daiso doesn't seem surprised that a psychotech went to Jump City. Like, the only thing I can figure is that he found out that Brushogun was trying to attract the Titans, but he didn't do anything to Brushogun about it because he needs Brushogun for his plan, and he was just confident in that moment because he thought he could handle the Titans, either by creating villains to defeat them, or by framing Robin, or preferably by just convincing them that Brushogun isn't a thing so that they would go home. Like, it's not perfect. It's not a perfect movie or anything, and the mystery's not super deep once you really break it down, but they do a good job of making it feel more intricate than it actually is. And Brushogun's an interesting villain, because, like I mentioned, he was a supervillain. That is a thing that he was. And yet, they rescue him in this. They lay him to rest. And that is seen as a good thing, not because a villain was destroyed, but because a person who was being exploited was not that anymore. Like, there have been exceptions, obviously, but for the most part, the villains in this show, they're just bad guys. There's not a lot of nuance to them. There was a little more nuance to Brushogun than to the average one-off Teen Titans villain. And that made the movie more interesting than it needed to be. Still, there are things about this movie that are a little disappointing, too. I already mentioned the other Titans don't get a lot to do. That's a bit of a bummer. But if you're someone who watched the entire show, I mean, I don't think that'll bother you as much. Like, maybe you wanted to see more of your favorite specific Titan than you actually did. But I don't think it would bother you that much, because this really is just a longer episode of the show. And not everybody got focus in every single episode, right? And the length is a little disappointing. I understand that this had to fit in an hour and a half worth of TV time, so they had to make allowances for, like, ads and stuff. But an hour and 15 minutes just feels short. Overall, though, I feel like this movie is a success. It's not the strongest TV or DVD movie that I could envision these characters in, but it's pretty good. And since I talked about the show continuing a little bit in my review of Things Change, I might as well talk about it a little bit here too. It makes me wonder why we didn't get more of these. Like, this one didn't do great. The reception of it wasn't, like, unanimously positive or anything, but it did pretty well. And it sold pretty well as a DVD release. And DC releases a lot of straight-to-DVD animated movies, the majority of which are pretty good, if not really good. And considering how popular this version of these characters are, even if it didn't happen right away after this movie was made, I'm genuinely surprised, the more I think about it, that this show was never continued in movie form, with straight-to-DVD movies. In a similar vein to this one, but made less as extensions of the show, and more as standalone movies with a more movie-appropriate runtime behind them. Like, I could see, just like there are some DC straight-to-DVD movies that adapt arcs from, like, Batman and stuff, them bringing in Titans that we never saw in the show, and doing, like, quick and dirty Teen Titans 03 versions of their backstories, or one of their arcs or something, in movie form. Like, they could have brought in Torre, for example, and adapted one of her 30 contradictory backstories. But in the style and the tone of this show, drawing upon its own lore to do so, fitting these characters into this world. We could have seen more of Robin and Starfire's relationship, and maybe even seen these characters grow up a little bit, and things get a little more serious for them. And now I'm kind of bumming myself out, because the more I talk about this, the more I really want this to happen. Almost more than like a season 6 of the show. I kind of want this to happen. This sounds like it's a pretty good idea. Not to toot my own horn or anything. All in all, though, I digress. This is a pretty good movie. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good, and I think it's satisfactory for what it is. An extra long episode of this good show that I really like, with these characters that I really like. It advances some stuff. It gives everybody at least a little bit to do. It looks good, and it's fun to watch. And I just gotta say it, as much as Things Change isn't the worst thing ever, this is a better finale than Things Change. I don't think it's a better finale than the 2 episodes before Things Change, but it's a better finale than Things Change. I would imagine that anybody who's seen the show has seen this as well, but if you haven't, I mean, check it out for sure. It's good enough. I don't think you'll regret it. But as per usual, guys, if you have seen Teen Titans Trouble in Tokyo, what do you think of it? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below. And while you're down there, you might as well like the video, share it with anyone else you think would enjoy my content, subscribe if you haven't. You can also check out links to my various social medias, as well as the many ways you can help out the channel. Those will be in the video description. But either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.
Papa's schedule control, Mama's weight control, wishes are endless. Teen Titans go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, Teen Titans!